Today we're going to finish lesson 9, and Amir Hashem even start lesson 10. That's the plan. That's why I sent out this morning both emails. So in the Kosher Kitchen series, the 27th of January, and the 2 weeks Shvat was Shabbos, so that makes today the 16th, and now already the 17th of Shvat. Okay, we're on page 86 at the bottom. The rest of lesson 9 isn't that practical, unless you deal. It happens to be fascinating issues, but for daily stuff, it's not that practical. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of things and then move forward. There's one point that I think I want to clarify from last week. I was talking to you about gelatin. In non-kosher, can use gelatin in medicine. So the only question, and this is a machlokes, really is an argument, is what happens to gelatin that actually makes something taste good in medicine. So sometimes children's medicine or children's toothpaste, they'll add gelatin to it, and here it's medicinal, but it actually now is giving what's called the tam tov, a good taste to it. And then there's the whole question, is it appropriate or not to eat? Okay, so there's one issue. When I was talking last week, I meant like gelatin just as an emulsifier, as a binding agent for medications, but sometimes, especially in children's medicine, they will add gelatin, and now it'll make those like cherry flavors and the raspberry flavors and bubble gum. All of a sudden now what they're consuming is true, it's medicine, but now it tastes good. That perhaps could be a problem if there's a non-kosher ingredient in there. Okay, so on page 86, the author here talks about eggs and why they're parv, simply because, why isn't it Aver Min Achai? We know that one of the part of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, there's actually a lot more mitzvos that non-Jews have to keep, but those are the 7 primary ones, and one of them is Aver Min Achai. So how come? How can you have an egg? It appears to be Aver Min Achai. And so the truth is, it actually requires, according to some opinions, the Torah has to give us a license to eat eggs, or we perhaps would assume that it'd be forbidden. I want to guess what might be the source in the Torah that we're allowed to eat eggs. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to do something about eggs. Anyone know what it is? Shiluach. Again, right? You shoo away the mother bird, and you go climb up and take eggs. So why are you taking eggs for? So it must be you're taking eggs because you want to eat them. So the Torah itself talks about taking eggs. It must be you're taking eggs because you want to eat them, and therefore it's permissible to actually eat eggs. That's what it says on page 87. It's a shach. And, no, it's not a shach. Is it a shach? No, it's a Gilum Marsham, the shach. Yes, it is, and that's the reason why we're allowed to eat eggs. And by the way, milk is the same thing. How do you know you're allowed to eat milk? Right? By the way, who said milk is milchitz, right? Maybe it's also Aver Min Achai, right? I'll give you an example. If you have an animal that's alive, and also you want to eat its wing or its leg, you can't do that. You have to shaft it first, right? So maybe an egg is just part of the animal, and maybe the milk is part of an animal. The answer is no. The Torah itself gives us a license to tell us that no, an egg is separate from the animal. It's a separate entity. You're allowed to eat it, and so too the milk of a kosher animal you also would be allowed to consume as well. What's the pasuk in the Torah that permits milk? So again, we have to assume it's the pasuk Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. There, the milk is most probably, at least based on many sources, the milk there is referring to milk from, even from goats. That would perhaps allow us to have milk and okay. All right. The other thing, which is a fascinating topic. It's a fascinating topic because there's a split among Ashkenazim and Sephardim. It leads to a lot of complications. There's perhaps a mistake, actually, that entered the Shulchan Aruch, and this is a major issue. And that is, what about mixing, actually, we'll get the easy one first. What about mixing meat and fish? Are you allowed to mix meat and fish? So we know that we don't, right? What happens? You sit at your table, and you have a separate plate, and you have a separate fork, and that actually is the halacha. Not only that, but to some extent, mixing fish and meat is a sakana. The Gemara says it is dangerous, on page 87 there at the bottom, and really we should make sure to have separate plates and forks for meat and for fish. What do you have to do between the two courses? I gotta mention this. First, what do you do between the two courses? So, this is one of the sources for having a l'chaim on Shabbos. Because in between fish and meat, you should clean your palate. So the actual minhag is to wash our hands. That's actually what's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. We don't do that. That appears not to be the minhag today. Mishnah Berurah says, today we don't wash our hands anymore, but instead you should drink something. Maybe you should wash your mouth out, have piece of challah, have a shot of scotch. Right? In this way, it'd be permissible. You might have to wash your hands today for a very simple reason. We are dignified. Right? We don't eat with our hands. We use cutlery. So in the olden days, we didn't use cutlery. You have to wash your hands. Instead, what do? We just use another set of cutlery. So that's perhaps why we do not need to wash our hands anymore, simply because the Martha Stewart has taught us that it's not appropriate to use our hands when we eat. Okay, we really should, by the way, we should be makpid, or if those of you, and I think many people do have, fish and meat, you should separate it by, again, eating something, washing something to clean out your mouth, and not mixing the two. Okay, what I meant to refer to is a fascinating issue. Can you mix milk and fish? Okay, Sephardim do not. What do you mean Sephardim do not? How could it be? It's very strange. How could Sephardim do not? Ashkenazim eat it without a problem. Especially because we know that lox and cream cheese. There's a minhag among the Jewish people to have lox and cream cheese in America. How is this possible? You can get actually sometimes herring that's milchik. It exists and it gets a wonderful ashkacha. How could you have herring that's milchik? How is that even possible? So here's what happened. You take a look on page 88 that the Beis Yosef, who's the Mechaber Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Karo, mentions in the halacha that you cannot eat fish and dairy and milchiks together. That's what it says in Yoreh De'ah. Comes along the Shach, which is a commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, and the Taz, and says, what are you talking about? We've never heard of such a minhag. Not only have we never heard of such a minhag, there's no source for it in the Talmud, and it must be a scribal error and a mistake in the Shulchan Aruch. So there's no way the Beis Yosef would say such a thing. I mean, that's extreme, right? Where's your source? There's no source. Doesn't know where he got it from. So the truth is, and it was mentioned, that there are Sephardim who do not eat milk and fish together. That being the case, there are those who do. It has not been a universally accepted custom, not among the Sephardim, welcome guys, not to mix the two together. And in fact, if you take a look on page 88, he doesn't quote it. I thought he did. Now, he doesn't actually mention who matters it. There are opinions that matter it. What's interesting, that Kaf HaChaim, who's a more modern Sephardi posek, says you can have butter with fish, and the Yalkut Yosef, Rav Yosef, says it's also permissible to have butter with fish. That perhaps milk with fish might be a problem for Sephardim, but the butter, maybe even cream cheese, might not be a problem for Sephardim. For Ashkenazim, it's for sure not a problem. You can enjoy your bagel, you can enjoy your cream cheese, you can enjoy your lox. It's for sure not a problem. Even among Sephardim who are lenient totally, and even those who are more strict might even allow non-milk, meaning butter and cream cheese might be, in fact, permissible if it's dairy. Yeah, you're now Sephardi, so what are you going to do?
I lots of cream cheese in my house right now.
Avi, yeah? He always did.
Avi doesn't eat fish.
Oh, okay. But he did, his family does.
His family doesn't eat lots of cream cheese, but not as like a strict rule, just because they just don't. So I was just wondering, is it possible, like, have you ever heard of Sephardi to change their minhag? Like, I didn't feed my kids
only on Sundays.
Yeah.
I can't say I've done extensive research on this topic. It's a famous Tau Sofrim that the Shachnatas quote, that it's a mistake that when the Shulchan Aruch wrote it. I have to really find out I'm sure there were different Sephardim, who are different communities, did different things. It wasn't universally accepted among Sephardim. I mean, nothing is in these areas are universally accepted. Not all Sephardim have that custom. And so perhaps if he came from a certain area which didn't do it, it could be that at some point he did and didn't. They went back and forth because they moved into somewhere, their parents didn't, kind of adjust to what other people do, even though you never did it yourself. So you have to really find out, what city they come from, or what, country they came from, and what village in that country, perhaps what the custom was.
But isn't the process just nullifiable?
So that's a little bit more complicated. Now's not the time. When can you nullify a minhag? There's a famous sefer that talks about minhagim, written 150 years ago. I believe it's called the Kolbo. And he wrote a whole kuntrus at the back, the Bear Hativ, on a whole thing about minhagim and how they work, and what's a good minhag, what's a bad minhag, when do you do a minhag, how do you nullify minhagim, can you? It depends on the community, right? Generally speaking, minhagim were communal based, meaning a classic example is, of course, kitnias, right? Kitnias, Ashkenazim accepted the kitnias, right, rice on Pesach. Sephardim didn't. That being said, a lot of Sephardim don't have rice on Pesach. So, it really, really, really depended, and that was a community base. So again, this was, in many cases, this was a minhag more than a halacha in the Sephardi world, perhaps, yeah.
Sorry if this is more on the topic of minhag.
Yeah, minhag is a great topic, yeah.
But,
we should dedicate a whole topic just to minhagim. Fascinating.
What if someone's like Baal Tshuva and they're Sephardi, but they're in an Ashkenaz community and that's how they're becoming from, then they're taking on the minhag from the start. Is that the same as nullifying a minhag?
Yeah, look, right. So that's an issue of tefillin. That's an issue of kinya, right? What are you going to do with kinya, right? That's the same, often, I'll give them the classic, many times they adopt whatever yeshiva that they went to, and not really the Sephardic minhag. Now, if I were to say that in a place like Brooklyn, I get stoned, in the Sephardic community. How could you do that to Sephardim? But in many places, what's happened, especially with the Baal Tshuva movement, is that a lot of Sephardim have adopted, especially places like Toronto, which is very Ashkenazi centered. I have nothing against Sephardim there. So, especially 30 years ago, there wasn't a Sephardi kollel in Toronto. It didn't exist. Now you have Sephardi kollels in schools and shuls. They're much more prolific. But 20 years ago, forget it. It didn't really exist. You have people today who are Sephardi who put on tefillin like Chabad. How's that possible, right? But that's what happens. They come like Tshuva from Chabad. That's what they end up doing. What happens later on? Look, you have people who daven Ashkenazi their whole life, and they realize they're really Sephardi. And go back to davening Sephardi. The Azizas, I think, all did that. A bunch of the Azizas switched to Sephardi after a while. So you do have people who go back and forth. I'll give you another example, and we'll stop there. Another example is Sfrat Omer. What are the days of Sfrat Omer? What days are days of Avilut, and what days are not days of Avilut? Most Hasidic communities in Toronto, almost universally, when I was growing up, no weddings, none. From the first day Pesach, right, from Pesach until Lag BaOmer. You couldn't, after Lag BaOmer, everyone, the mourning period basically ceased. That was, but then the problem was it wasn't necessarily the minhag. A lot of people only held it from the second day of Iyar until 3 days before Shavuot. So you could get married then, right after Pesach, for a couple weeks until Rosh Chodesh. What did Toronto start to do? A few years ago, the rabbi said, people want to get married, and so what can you do? Wedding halls are allowed to open any day that's either one or the other. So now wedding halls are only closed from second day of Iyar until day before Lag BaOmer, which is only a couple weeks. You can get married. What happens if your minhag is one? Can you go to someone else's wedding? Moshe Feinstein says you can. You switch minhagim every year. What? It's a later minhag because it's complicated. So not all minhagim are created equally. Certain minhagim are more community. What happens in Toronto and New York, where it's a chult of minhagim, right? Every shul is different. You have in Thornhill alone, you have Chabad down the block, and you have the Bayit, and you have the Sephardim, Ashkenazim, and by the way, two Sephardim are the same, Ashkenazim are the same, and Nusach Sfar, Nusach Ashkenaz. So it's really, really different in terms of minhagim, what to adopt. So, okay, but it's a great question. Rav Shachtar spoke about it. If you want more details specific, we can talk about it. All right, let's move on. Okay, in terms of, if you take a look at the bottom on page 88, Ashkenazi most people rely, it says here on the Pischei Tshuva, who in turn brings the word of the Prima Gadim, will hold that there is a danger to cook fish and milk together, but not fish with cheese or butter. His final ruling is that he permits fish and milk to cook together because this is the prevailing custom on Jews across the world. So it is true, and again, it really, believe it or not, even Ashkenazi communities, there were those who were worried about milk and fish. That appears not to be the accepted minhag and custom. And today, again, especially in the Ashkenazi world, everyone has not just cream cheese and lox, but you could even have milk cooked with lox together, or whatever fish. Okay. The next issue, which is really, it's a fascinating topic, but it is almost irrelevant unless you live in Europe, and that is the concept of kosher cheese. It's worthwhile just mentioning, just to have a little bit of understanding in the world out there. Kosher cheese, up until recently, was almost, you had to make it at home, because to get the rennet that you need to make cheese had to be kosher, and they were always made actually with meat. What they would do is they would take the part of meat from a cow, they would take some milk, and together that combination would produce an enzyme, and from that enzyme you could produce yogurts and you could produce cheeses, but it actually was a part of a meat base. So if it was from a non-kosher animal, then you'd really be in trouble. Not only is it a non-kosher animal, if it's from a cow that didn't have shechita, you also would really be in trouble. And therefore, yogurt companies and kosher yogurt and cream cheese are very difficult to come by. That is not the case anymore. You know, you look at Sobeys, you had no idea this was. I remember, I'm not that old. I remember growing up, there were very few cheeses. You didn't have so many kosher cheese options at all growing up. Now you have tons of kosher cheeses. That really wasn't the case not that long ago. And in Europe today, it is very hard to find kosher cheese. In fact, someone just told me that a lot of the Chabad in Spain, if you want kosher cheese, you got to go to Chabad because they can make you kosher cheese. Okay, and the reason why, it's because it's made by a mamid, and which is the catalyst to produce this enzyme. And even though the catalyst is so insignificant, since it's a catalyst is always significant from a halachic kosher perspective. So even though it's insignificant, it's 1 part out of 1,000, 1 part out of 10,000, it doesn't matter since it is this catalyst to produce this enzyme. Okay, and there are different ways to make cheese, but again, yeah.
If a little piece of pork falls into a big pot that has kosher food, you take that piece out and eat it.
Right. So
betel bashishim, is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's betel bashishim. I mean, there are exceptions to it. So a mamid is never mevatel. Chazal said this is so significant. Again, batel means it's insignificant. This is a mamid, but since this is something which is an enzyme, this is a catalyst that's going to produce an enzyme. Something which is a catalyst, even though from a ratio perspective is insignificant, since it is the catalyst to create this chemical reaction, it is always significant. And therefore this catalyst must be kosher. And since this catalyst was created with a meat-milk mixture, it's problematic from a kosher perspective. And that is why cheese needs hashgacha. Okay? So in order to create the rennet to make the cheese, you would needed to take this rennet, and it says here, you allow a calf to nurse fully, then you slaughter, you shech the calf before it digests the milk. When this milk, the milk inside the keva, inside the udder, is added to a vat of fresh milk, it's a catalyst to make the cheese-making process. This needs hashgacha, and that is why you have all these kosher cheeses today. Okay? And that's a problem with cheese made by a non-Jew, because you don't know how it's made, and it could be very problematic from a kashrus perspective. I mentioned already gelatin before. I'll touch on it a little bit now. It's on the bottom of page 90, because this is a major argument today in Israel, and it's worthwhile at least being a little to understand what the difference between badatz and rabbanut and mahadrin. One issue they fight over is gelatin. Just so you know what the argument is. And I'll explain it. He spelled it somewhat nicely on the bottom of page 90, but I'm going to explain a little bit more. So here we go. What is gelatin? Bottom of page 90. Gelatin is a colorless, water-soluble, glutinous protein obtained from animal tissues such as bone and skin. Kosher gelatin can be made with kosher fish bones and or with kosher beef skins, hoofs, ground bones, etc. Just as the stomach lining can be used for making cheese, even if it has been dried to a point is like a piece of wood, so too beef skin and other animal byproducts can be dried to the point that they can cease to be considered food. There is much discussion among the great rabbis of our generation and previous ones if drawing out the bones will help to permit the bones. Meaning, if I have a bone from a pig, a hoof from a pig, and it's been dried out so much, and I use it. By the way, I can also use this a bit to make cheese in the cheese process, or for gelatin. Does it make this like a bone, like a piece of wood, and therefore it would be kosher? Because that's a famous argument already for a couple hundred years in the world of manufacturing.
Why?
Because if at some point in time, I wouldn't even consider this a food. I turned it into wood. It's been, even though it originally came, at some point in time, I take a part of an animal and it's been so rotten, it's been so decomposed. Even though I can use it from a food engineering perspective, at some point in time it would lose, it would turn into this wood called eighth. So when that happens, does it lose its food status? It loses its food status, it comes from a pig, it'd be okay. So there were those people who did rely on this in the cheese-making world, and that's how you had non-Jewish cheeses. Now we don't need to rely on that leniency. And originally, the Rabbanut Harashi relied on that leniency when it came to gelatin. That is why you see a lot of these products, all these, especially in the food and candies and stuff, had also had a shkacha on them. Had that shkacha in the Rabbanut. They were made from non-kosher gelatin. The Rabbanut, a few years ago, really stopped doing it. That's one of the reasons why you had Mahadrin, why Bedatz, because they didn't want to rely on that leniency. There were great Talmidei Chachamim who said it was permissible. The prevailing minhag today is to no longer rely on that leniency. And I believe, don't quote me on this, that even the Rabbanut today no longer relies on that leniency, and all gelatin that is kosher is either from kosher fish or from another method that was been kosher at the beginning, and not to rely that it's treated as wood. So there you go. That was one. Some people want to know the difference between ashkachas in Israel. For a while, that was one of the differences between Rabbanut and Mahadrin or Badat. So, good information to know. Yeah.
If you extract gelatin from beef, would that use that gelatin
to make it fleshik? That's a great question. So again, we actually would probably say it's probably not fleshik. The problem is going to be kosher might be different than fleshik. Right? But again, you're right. That's exactly part of potentially part of the problem to do. Yeah. Probably not fleshik because it's such a minimum amount, right? Anyways. Okay, let's go to lesson 10. Lesson 10 is extremely, extremely practical. It's called serving meat and milk. The source of how can you have milk and meat at the same table? Right? How do you deal with that if two people are eating together? Are they strangers? Are they friends? How do you govern? I know in schools, one of the reasons why I never just said my children didn't want to take leftover meat, leftover Shabbos leftovers to school. I asked my kids, why do you want to take it? The answer they'd say is because they make us sit at a meat table. It's like segregation, right? Every table in school is dairy, is milchik, is chalavi, and one table for the nebuch, the meat eaters. Right? The carnivores out there. So the question is, why would they do that? Why would they in a school, why would they segregate people who are eating meat? Is that the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? Is that because it's a school? Is that what you're supposed to do? What about at home? Right? My kids sometimes, when they boycott, my wife's cooking, we're eating cereal tonight. Right? So what do? We kick them out? Do we let them sit down at the table? This is very, very practical. I can't relate to it whatsoever. I mean, for me, I'm the one eating fleishiks if people are eating lochiks. So, but definitely not the other way. Okay, here we go. What is the source? Page 92. It's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says one is not allowed to place meat and cheese on the same table, and Beis Hillel holds even chicken and cheese can't be at the same table. Okay? Where does this apply? Where you normally eat a meal. However, you can place both a plate with meat and a plate with dairy on the same serving table. So this is very important. Meaning, I'll give you an example. Let's say this is my dining room table. This is where I eat. So I would not be allowed again, we'll talk about it. I would not be allowed to have a plate of milchiks, a plate of meat, and a plate of milk. No, and a plate of milchiks, and a plate of meat and milk at the same dining table. But while I'm serving on my counter, I'd be allowed to. I don't. Women cringe when they hear this. I would actually be allowed to have, if I'm serving milk and meat, I'd be allowed to keep it on the same table, on the same countertop, right? Right. So serving is different than actually where you are eating. Now, the obvious question, especially after last week's discussion, I don't understand. Why can't I eat chicken and cheese on the same table, or chicken during the same table? Let's go back to what we said last week, right? Chicken itself, the fact that it is treated as meat is only the Rabbanan, right? It's a rabbinic decree. Chicken is substitute for meat, therefore we treat chicken like meat. Now we're going to take another fence and say, oh, by the way, not only do we treat chicken as meat, but you can't even serve this chicken, which isn't really meat, at the same table as dairy. What's the problem? I'm not mixing it. They're totally separate. Why is it that the rabbis felt they needed to place a fence? It appears it's superfluous. It appears that it is going too far with rabbinic decrees. Okay? At some point in time, Chachamim had to say, enough already. But why is that not the case? Why is, in fact, that is the halacha? Okay, where does it end? Okay, good. So here we go. There are certain times where Chazal felt they had to make a fence around the fence. And the question is, when did they do that? Because in order to appreciate it, let's go to an extreme case, and you'll be like, what? That makes no sense. Here it is. What about if I don't have chicken from Sobeys and cheese? What about if I have pig, non-kosher meat, and dairy at my table? Right? Is that permissible? So take a look at this. Page 93. Right? Any food that is kosher but is forbidden to one personally is forbidden to be brought to the table where one is eating for fear that he or she may forget and eat it. For example, if a person is under a diet and made a shvuah not to eat certain food, it cannot be placed on the table during a meal, since essentially it is similar in appearance to any kosher food which a person may eat by mistake. So if a person says, I'm taking an oath, I'm taking a shvuah, a neder, I'm not eating beef for 30 days. Take a proper shvuah. They would not be allowed. They can't even have a friend of theirs have beef at the table. Now explain to me, what's the rationale for such a statement? What's the rationale? Not to be tempted. Now here's the reason why. At day 31, can they eat that meat? They can eat that meat. If you have meat and milk at the same table, and they're both kosher, the temptation that you're going to eat one from the other. Why? That's kosher and this is kosher. With that in mind, this is very counterintuitive, right? Why? But any food, continue reading, that no one is allowed to eat from may be placed on his table, because he would never mistakenly eat it. You're going to mistakenly pick up a piece of bacon? There's no way you're going to do that. Therefore, it's permissible to bring non-kosher cold cuts, basar nevela, to the table when you're eating milk, because we're not worried that someone will mistakenly eat from it, since we never eat non-kosher foods. So bacon you could have on your table when you're having your cereal in the morning, but Booby's chicken you're not allowed to have on the table in the morning when you're having your cereal. Okay? And the rationale is very simple. I am connected. I usually eat that food on a regular basis. To stop myself for this 10 minutes, for this 2 hours, for this 6 hours is more difficult. As opposed to something, I never eat this. I've never eaten this my entire life. Never eaten this for the past 3 years. Therefore, psychologically, I've created this emotional barrier. I'm not tempted to pick it up and eat it.
So what if you stopped eating bacon and now it's there in front of your eyes?
So you've been eating bacon for the past 20 years of your life, and last week you decided to cut out bacon from your diet to go kosher. It's a great question. I have no idea. Yeah. It's a good question. I'm not so sure.
I used to eat totally non-kosher.
Right.
I decided 4 years ago to stop eating non-kosher.
Okay.
And there have been times where I've been around people eating things that I used to love to eat, and I just view it as like a bigger test from Hashem because I know what it tastes like and I've had it. I know.
And you're saying that's hard for you to stop, and there's a temptation.
It's hard for me to stop. There's sometimes a temptation, but my desire to keep the mitzvah
Right.
is stronger than the temptation, so I won't eat.
You know what's amazing? The Rambam writes. The Rambam writes. When you smell non-kosher food, you're supposed to say the following: the food smells amazing. It's so good, but God commands me not to eat it. I know I do that when I go to baseball games. You go down and you smell like the outdoor grills. You know, you're like, that's like, you walk outside. You have a hot dog to a ball game. Yeah, it was kosher. The only reason it's been kosher when I grew up, in, right in Exhibition Stadium, there's no kosher hot dog stand. But the Jays were good, so there's a trade-off.
Isn't that the whole thing? Like you're not supposed to run away from the problem. You're supposed to face it.
Right. Okay. That's not so simple because we say every day that we shouldn't be tested. Lo lidei nisyonot. We don't place ourselves in tests. It's not so simple. Not so simple. I want to use this as a springboard for something which I think you're all going to really appreciate now, and this will give us an appreciation for the mind of Chazal. Okay. Here we go. If you eat food on Yom Kippur, what do you transgress according to the Torah? It's an Isser of. Come on. What's the Isser on eating on Yom Kippur? Is it just a lav? No. What is it? Isser of karet, right? Karet. Whatever karet means, different interpretations. If you eat bread on Pesach, what's the Isur? Karet, right? Karet. Eating bread on Pesach, eating food on Yom Kippur. Isur karet. Okay. On Pesach, we go crazy, or at least on my house we go crazy. Not only do I have to vacuum the entire house, I have to then, whatever bread I have, I got to lock up, or I throw in the garbage, and then I sell it to Chris. On Yom Kippur, I have all my food, I have access to it. Not only that, it's not even muksa. I can take food and feed my kids. Is that crazy?
Just one day though.
Well, so, one day, I don't know, I like eating one day. You ever hear the difference? How come on Pesach we go crazy? Isser karet. Isser karet. Don't eat bread. Don't own it. Don't possess it. You can't even see it if it's yours, right? You can't see it, you can own it. The rabbi said, sell to non-Jew, get rid of it, gone. Comes Yom Kippur, Isser karet. It's not, the rabbis don't even say that it's muksa. I can take food, I can feed my kids. If someone's sick, I can give them food. I don't have to sell it. Now, I can't cook. You can't cook on Yom Kippur, right? It's like Shabbat. But I can give sandwiches. How many of you never seen sandwiches as a kid? You've never said, can't touch food. What's going on here? Think classic example. Rabbi should have made a gezerah saying, food is muksa, food is something on Yom Kippur, and nothing, zero. There's some Kabbalah Hasidim which say you shouldn't mention food or bread. Not only that, if you eat on Yom Kippur, you got a bench and you say Ritzei. I'm not Ritzei, sorry, Yalva Yavo. Say Ritzei for Shabbos. Some people even argue, if you eat Yom Kippur and you eat bread, you got to say Yalva Yavo. And there are those who want to argue if it's on Shabbos, you should make Kiddush. I'm going to hold it by the halacha, but what's going on here? You'd think it's like the rabbis for sure should have said something. Here is something which is the psychology of the human being. What's the difference between eating Pesach and Yom Kippur? The difference is very simple. On Yom Kippur, what is your psychological state of mind? You can't eat anything. So therefore, b'dilei nafshe, you've totally separated yourself from a psychological perspective from eating food. No food is permissible. I can't eat anything. Isser karet, boom, the wall goes up. They weren't worried that you were going to come and eat it. You know why? There's a very serious offense of eating on Yom Kippur. But when it comes to Pesach, what's the problem? You can eat on Pesach. Oh boy, you can eat on Pesach. Right? So since you can eat some foods and not other foods, your mind psychologically is in the mode of eating. Since you're in the mode of eating, you'd think you'd eat this, you'd eat the matzah, oh, there's bread and cookies, you'll eat that too. Whoa! It's a karet. And that is why the rabbis needed. The truth really is the Torah. This is an example where the Torah put a fence around itself. Meaning there's an Isser Doraita in the Torah to eat bread on Pesach, and the Torah put a fence around it and said, Ba Yireh, Ba Yimata. Don't own it, don't possess it. But that the Torah put a fence around itself, right? That gives the rabbis a license to make fences around things as well. So we see here that Chazal could only make fences, right, when they had to understand the psychology of the human being. What are people? What is a person's mindset? And they felt that in Yom Kippur, the mindset is no eating, Isser Kare, boom. They didn't feel it was necessary to make what we call food muksa. As opposed to on Pesach, a person eats, a person grabs food, a person eats here, there. You have matzah, you got this, you got chicken soup and therefore you might also would come accustomed to eat, shall we say, non-Pesach food as well. We need to make it a serious offense. The Torah need to make it a serious offense. So it's fascinating how the psychology, and this is very much connected to this milchets and fleishiks on the same table. You can't have meat and milk when people are eating at the same table, but non-kosher meat you can have because we're not worried because you put again the psychological barrier towards it. What about it psychologically? You don't have such a barrier towards it because you just became kosher a few weeks ago. It's a phenomenal question. I don't have the answer. So, okay. Yes, there's no question. This is a distinction between how people don't know each other. What about if we're foreigners? You know, we're at Bar-Ilan University. Cafeteria is kosher, but they're strangers. So person A is sitting here, person B is sitting there. They don't know each other. You're eating meat and you're eating milk. So if you're total strangers, you're not going to eat my food. If you're sitting at your university, some stranger that goes and takes your food, that's like weird. You know, like you don't do that. That's like odd. So if they're total strangers, excuse me, it could be that we're not so worried. And that's if you take a look on page 94. It's the Mishnah on Chulin continues. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the bolded words. Two travelers are allowed to eat at the same table, even though one is eating meat and one is eating milk. We're not worried that they're going to eat from the same plate. Because again, it's not. Again, this is much more psychology than human nature. Human nature is you don't take food from somebody else if they're a total stranger. But if you're not a stranger, look at the next paragraph. Rav Chanan ben Ami said in the name of Shmuel, this Mishnah was taught in the case where travelers are not friendly with each other. However, in the case where travelers who are friendly, they can't eat at the same table. How much more so if you're in the same family? Which hopefully you're friendly in the same family, right? That's not always the case either, but we're going to assume it is, right? Rav Yomer bar Shammai said to Abaye, two brothers who are stringent with each other, they don't share the same resources. What's the halacha? See, brothers don't always get along, right? The answer is that it's still forbidden because for them to eat milk and milk at the same table. Isn't that fascinating? But this is we see this like sometimes brothers they don't get along so well, right? I would never, right? It's like I would never take anything from you. Don't take anything from me. I won't take anything from you, right? It's like psychology that sometimes in family dynamics, even still, since they're brothers, they still might bend the rule when it comes to food. And what about if it's friends? Obviously, if they're friendly, you can't eat together because they're not embarrassed to eat from each other's plates. This is true even if brothers who are makbid not to do it. What about if they're enemy? In the case of people who are not brothers and they know each other and they're strict, what's the halacha? Can they eat without placing a reminder between them? Because you need what's called the heker. If you want to eat at the same table, you need a heker. You need some type of item on the table that's not usually there. What's usually not on a table? To put wallets on the table? I don't think so. Placemats are a common thing to do. You have pink, I have blue. You have green. Placemat sometimes could be a good hecker, a good reminder that you're eating milk, I'm eating meat. Someone say put cell phones on the table all the time. I don't think that'd be a good hacker. I don't know, vase maybe you could put on the table. I don't know, what do I have here, right? Car keys, little car keys on the table. Something that's not usually on the table. If you put it on the table, you know, as a reminder not to take from each other's plate. You don't need to put up a wall between them. You have to put something on the table. It's going to remind you not to share food from each other. It's also, by the way, in the case of Hilchot the Nidah, between husband and wife, also. It's the same idea. When they're at the alone on the same table, also in terms of heker, they can't share from each other's food as well. Okay, so if they know each other, they really shouldn't put food. We're actually machbir on that. Unless they're total strangers, then they will need some type of separation, some type of heker on the table. That would be sufficient. Yeah.
Let's say there's someone eating meat, but the person they're sitting at the table is a vegetarian. Like they're never gonna.
But I might reach over like the person eating milk could reach over to take the. Because the person eating milk is a vegetarian, and would never take that meat. But how about the person who's eating meat? They might take over with the milk, right? Yeah. So, all right, what's considered a good heker? If you look on page 96, we'll run through this. Actually, we're not going to run through it. We're going to touch on it and return to it next week. If you take a look, there's one slice of bread. If the bread is not part of the meal, the Ramah says that it's a good reminder. The Prima Gadim brings a lavush that holds that bread must be whole, meaning it has to be a loaf of bread. The Prima Gadim says that from the fact that the Ramah had to say that if you are eating from the bread that is not a reminder, we see that a piece of bread can be a reminder. So I see, generally speaking, you can usually put a piece of bread if it's not part of a meal. Some people don't like carbohydrates. They don't eat bread at other meals. So if you're not eating bread at a meal, for sure you'd be allowed to put a piece of bread on the table. A decanter, if it's usually on the table, it's not really going to help so much. But if it's, use decanter, let's say on Shabbos, so you put a decanter on the table, a fancy goblet, a fancy vase, those types of things would be okay. Obviously, a menorah would be okay. Most people don't put unless you're really fancy. Most people aren't having candlelight dinners on a usual basis. And again, a ring, probably not enough. A plate's probably not enough. If you're eating alone, it's probably it's also a problem. If there's milk and meat on the same table. Other people actually say that it's eating alone. It's not enough to have a reminder. The good news is about if you're with somebody, the other person can remind the other person not to take. So maybe when you're by yourself, we should be more stringent, and we really, really should be. Unless it's a really difficult situation, if you're eating by yourself, you really should not have milk and meat on the same table. And if there's many, many people, that's a great question. Because they might watch out for one another. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So if someone eats kosher their whole life,
they
really drink milk and meat and all that, then how will they ever forget? Or even have that?
So we're saying that the psychology of a human being is to share with someone else their food. Religious, not religious. The psychology of a human being is to reach over and to share food. And therefore, we have to be cognizant of that. And because again, we're so tempted that it just, these are good noodles. Why don't you try some pasta? Oh, you're fleishing,
So how about after, say, even when there's that 4 or 6 hour period?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll talk about it. Yeah.
So don't you need a reminder?
So then we're less worried because it's not at the same time.
Which means it's not as bad.
It's not as bad, right? We're talking about eating milk because remember, milk and meat at the same time. As we discussed this last week, milk and meat at the same time is a problem, right? Having milk and meat at the same time, that's an issue. The right to eat them together, right? As opposed to having dairy 2 hours later, the Gemara says you can't do it, but it's not the same. You're not dancing on a biblical prohibition at any point in time. You're dancing on a biblical prohibition if you reach over and take that person's cheese pasta. So I have to run tomorrow. Yeah.
Just practically speaking, when you're saying kids are kind of different people, is that necessary?
Okay, that's a good question. I want to end with that. Is it necessary to do it? So you could argue that especially for kids makes sense, right? Because they share. They're told they're not supposed to have allergies. Kids often share, and the other problem is often they have desserts in school, right? They bring desserts or cookies that are often milchik, that potentially could be a problem. So I understand why they do it, and it might not be, segregation might not be so nice. At your own table, so you could do the other ends of the table that you could do, put a hecker on the table, and again, they're going to put kids put a hecker on the table. They're cramped at the tables. They don't have extra room to put things. If they do, they get knocked over. So. That could be a problem. Okay, very good. We're going to end there for tonight. God willing, Mr. Hashem, next week.